So, what if a 19th century land survey, a key moment in World War I, and one of the most incredible air raids in military history were all connected? And not just connected, but connected by a single ancient timeline. Today we're going to trace a series of prophecies that some believe predicted not just what would happen, but the precise timing and even the methods of Jerusalem's deliverance, all the way from the Ottoman Empire right up to the modern day.
This promise, it comes from the book of Isaiah, chapter 62, and it's really a prophecy about a total transformation, The idea that a land known as forsaken and desolate would one day be cherished, almost like a bride. This really sets the stage for what would have to be a dramatic, almost unbelievable reversal of fortune.
Okay, so that's the big question, right? How does a prophecy like this, something written thousands of years ago, actually play out in the real world? What would it take for a place to go from being called desolate to being called cherished? Well, that's the journey we're about to go on, and it all starts with a look at the land itself.
Our story really kicks off in the 19th century. We're looking at a land that, it perfectly matched its ancient description. It was a place that seemed completely forgotten by time, but was, according to these prophecies, just waiting for a massive change.
Back in 1867, the famous author Mark Twain, he toured the Holy Land. And the way he wrote about it, it just painted this really stark picture. He called it desolate and unlovely. His words basically confirmed what the prophecies had said was going to happen thousands of years earlier. So that's our baseline, our starting point, a land waiting for a promise to be fulfilled.
Now, at this exact same time, something else was going on. This quote from the prophet Zechariah talks about a man measuring Jerusalem. And what's wild is that this lines up historically with the work of people like Charles Warren. These guys were conducting the first ever modern surveys of the city, literally measuring its width and its length with a measuring line.
But, for any prophecy of return to actually happen, you need a legal way to do it. So the next piece of this puzzle didn't come from some grand vision. Nope, it came from a pretty boring administrative act that ended up having these massive, massive consequences. The simple act of purchasing fields.
History often turns on really practical things. So after the Crimean War, the Ottoman Empire was basically bankrupt. They were in huge debt to Britain. So what do you do to raise money? Well, they passed the Land Code of 1867. This wasn't some spiritual decree. It was a financial one. But the result was absolutely monumental. For the first time, it allowed foreign citizens to legally buy and own land there.
And get this new law directly mirrors a prophecy in Jeremiah chapter 32, which said that fields would once again be bought with money in this very land. So, this one piece of legislation, a law born out of Ottoman debt, it became the legal key that unlocked the door for that prophesied return.
All right, now we're going to jump forward 50 years to a huge moment in world history, 1917. This year is a big deal. It marks the end of a 600-year-old empire, and for our story, a major turning point in this prophetic timeline.
So right in the middle of World War I, British forces managed to conquer Jerusalem, which ends 6 centuries of Ottoman control. It's a huge military victory, but it's also paired with a major political one, the Balfour Declaration, where Britain pledges its support for establishing a Jewish national home in Palestine.
Now, the prophecy for this event, it's from Isaiah chapter 31. And it uses this incredibly specific imagery. It talks about a defense and a deliverance of Jerusalem that would look like birds flying.
And here's where history gets really interesting. The brand new technology of warfare, the biplane, was the key. The British Royal Flying Corps Squadron 14 flew reconnaissance missions over Jerusalem. They secured air supremacy and made sure the city was preserved, not destroyed in the battle. And their motto? You can't make this up. It was, I spread my wings and keep my promise.
But wait, there's one more layer to this whole thing. The book of Daniel mentions a special blessing for those who reach 1335 days. Well, guess what? When Jerusalem was delivered in the Gregorian year 1917, the year on the Islamic calendar was precisely 1335.
So now let's jump forward another 50 years after 1917. Another huge conflict erupts, returning to the Six-Day War, and a second, maybe even more astonishing deliverance of Jerusalem, one that, again, involves complete supremacy in the air.
So, When the war kicked off on June 5, 1967, things looked really, really bad for Israel. Arab radio stations were all broadcasting news of these incredible victories, claiming they were bombing Israeli cities, that their armies were advancing. If you were listening, it would have sounded like the end was just hours away.
But the reality on the ground, or maybe I should say in the air, was the total opposite. What was really happening was that the Israeli Air Force had launched this absolutely devastating surprise attack. In less than 3 hours, they had achieved almost total air supremacy over the entire region.
The results were they were unprecedented in military history. I mean, nearly 500 Arab planes were destroyed, most of them before they even got off the ground. And Israel lost less than 40 of its own aircraft. It was one of the most lopsided air battles ever fought, period.
So how on earth did they do it? Well, it was an absolutely incredible feat of piloting skill. Israeli pilots flew their jets as low as 6 feet above the waves of the Mediterranean for nearly 70 miles. They stayed completely under enemy radar to achieve total, complete surprise. This one tactical move basically changed the course of the entire war.
And the war ended with Israeli paratroopers recapturing the old city of Jerusalem. In this moment, just dripping with history and emotion, a rabbi stood right there before the Western Wall on the Temple Mount and blew the shofar, that ceremonial ram's horn. It was a sound that had not been heard in that place for nearly 2 millennia.
And this brings us to the final piece of our timeline, where all these seemingly separate events, this land law, these 2 wars, they start to form this really distinct, repeating pattern.
So when you lay these dates out, a pretty striking pattern just jumps right out at you. From the 1917 deliverance to the 1967 recapture is exactly 50 years. Now, in the Bible, a 50-year cycle is called a jubilee. And then, precisely 50 years after 1967 brings us to 2017, another jubilee year, which saw the formal recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital.
That recognition was formally completed on May 14, 2018, which was the very final day of that Jubilee year. And it was said that on this day, the trump sounded again, a kind of symbolic echo of that shofar that was blown back in 1967.
And so that's where we're left. We have this incredible timeline of prophecies, land laws, and these stunning military victories in the air, all seeming to align on this perfect 50-year cycle. So is this evidence of some kind of divine pattern unfolding right through history, or is it all just a series of profound but ultimately random coincidences? That's the question this whole timeline leaves us with.